Hi, this is the first interview of the what I'm calling the Short Issues podcast, and I'm here with journalist Jeremy Cox. Could you introduce yourself, please?
Sure, Brian, it's good to hear. Good to be here. My name is Jeremy Cox. I'm a reporter with the Chesapeake Bay Journal, which is a nonprofit, independent newspaper that comes out once a month. But we have a website that's updated regularly, and I also host their podcast, which is called Chesapeake Uncharted. So there's my plug.
Great, great. Well, everyone should follow that immediately. I will as well. Yeah, so I read your article on Bay Journal this morning, and could you tell us about what's going on with the chicken farms on the Eastern Shore?
Mhm. Well, sure. So the Environmental Integrity Project is a environmental group based out of DC, and they've made it one of their missions in recent years to uncover, uh, let's say, negative things about the poultry industry here on the Eastern Shore. And I'm being a little flip when I say negative things. They've been really stepping in as sort of a watchdog NGO, and in order to put pressure on, I would say, lawmakers, policymakers, to affect change in that industry. So what's new here is Environmental Integrity Project got this trove of public records from Maryland Department of the Environment and the Agricultural Department as well. And sort of the centerpiece is these inspection reports that are done annually at poultry farms, the 500 plus poultry farms that are done around here, and found out that violations are not uncommon, but the penalties, the fines are rather uncommon. So they're using that to say, hey, they're, as the title of the report says, turning a blind eye to chicken. They're letting this industry get away with polluting their land and local waterways and the Chesapeake Bay, and they're not, doing the job they need to do, basically, to clean things up.
Right. When you use the word uncommon about the fines, what uncommon in that they're high or uncommon that they're low?
Right. So they had MDE imposed fines on just 8 of the 78 farms with repeat violations.
Right.
And of those, collected fines in only half the cases. So for whatever reason, the other four were let off the hook in terms of paying the fines. Perhaps they, mitigated the problem, and they took pity on them. I don't know what, but yeah. So 78 out of those, you know, many hundreds of inspections, and of those, only 8 fines and 4 collected.
Right. Yeah. And I was looking at the EIP report here. It says these are really slap on the wrist type fines. These are like a couple $1,000s for. It says total fines collected in 2019 6,000, 2,250 in 2020, $0 in 2021, and in 2018 as well.
Right.
Um, yeah, so the fines really seem to be like extra low for kind of systemic breaking of environmental regulation laws.
Yeah, I mean, that's how EIP would like to, present this picture here, as an industry that is kind of being let off the hook. Um, but it should be said that, in context, this is not uncommon, right? That industries and other sectors and other jurisdictions, it's really rare to see heavy fines given out for any kind of industrial pollution. Even for ones that sort of seem galling. You'll, in factories and chemical pollution and that sort of thing, and then maybe a few grand, and so that's why, for a lot of these entities, it's almost cheaper to, well, it is cheaper to pollute and then pay the fine than it is to fix the problem that caused the pollution in the first place. But I think these are a little bit different. Than we're not talking necessarily about like huge corporations. Some of these are owned by investor groups, but many of these farms are uh, mom and pop, and so I think there's a real effort by the regulatory system to try to get them to move toward compliance and help them to that instead of coming out, with a stick, in the first place, and maybe creating that adversarial atmosphere. So that's kind of what we have going on here in Maryland.
Right, and the EIP is kind of serving as that NGO type whistleblower group to bring attention to these violations.
Yeah. So they're coming in and saying, look, this is not enough. If it were enough, these fines, these citations would dry up, and the citations have been going down, and so the industry is saying, look, that's proof positive right there that the system is working. But the EIP says, well, you factor in the COVID and everything else, and this is nowhere near enough of an effect to make that claim. So.
Right, and the Delmarva Chicken Association, is that the
Yeah.
yeah, the DCA, we'll call it, seems to be saying that we have reduced our pollution runoff. Sorry, well, what were their other claims to rebuttal the EIP's report? I forgot. Writing the ticket, giving the $100 fine is not solving the bigger issues of making sure people are driving safe through the area.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it kind of like a little bit self-admitting that they're okay with paying fines, or that they want more regulation for themselves. I don't know how seriously that means they're taking the issue.
Yeah, they're saying that, just because people, I mean, cops are always writing tickets for speeding, and yet, speeding still occurs. I think that's their point, is that you can fine people all day, but that's not going to solve the problem. What does solve the problem is what they like to see the state doing, which is that compliance assistance. You have these farmers, again, this is what DCA would say. You have these farmers who do care about the land, and sometimes they're going to make, sometimes a mistake is going to come up. There's going to be an issue of non-compliance, of some paperwork issues, or some incorrect storage of dead birds or something like that. And yeah, you could sit and, as a regulatory agency, write fines and wipe your hands of it and walk away, but does that really solve the problem? And so they'll say, no, don't write the fine, help them, point out the problem, help them get to where they need to be. And that farmer then is it's not hurting their livelihood anyway. I mean, that's obviously DCA's number one thing, is they want to ensure the financial viability of everyone up and down this supply chain.
Right. So for some greater context, can you tell us how big the industry is? Are you able to cite off any to give us context as to the size of the poultry industry? So are these 182 poultry farms on the Eastern Shore? Or because it looks like
so they pretty much all of them. I mean, if there's any on the Western Shore, it's a pretty negligible amount. So here on Delmarva, so this is not just Maryland, but it includes Delaware and Accomack County in Virginia. Each year we're looking at I need to make that bigger. I'm sorry. So each year we're looking at about 605 million chickens produced on the peninsula, the tri-state area, and that equates to 4.3 billion pounds of chickens coming from this area. Nationwide, that's 57 billion pounds of chickens. So you can see that's, like you said, around 7-8% of all broiler chickens in the country are produced right here. We're a pretty small area, so I know 7-8% doesn't sound like very much, but remember, I mean, Delmarva is, we're talking about an area that's maybe 60 miles long and at most 30 miles wide. So we pack a punch.
Yeah, right. So having said that, it seems to be where the majority of the poultry farms are concentrated are on the interior counties like Caroline and Queen Anne's, Dorchester, Kent. It seems to be where the majority of the
Yeah.
stuff is concentrated.
Yeah, there is definitely there's a few focal points, and absolutely northern Dorchester, Talbot, Queen Anne's County, and the inland portion, Caroline County. Absolutely a big central part of this. I like to say the broiler belt.
Oh, right. That's catchy. I
Sure.
like that.
Yeah.
What type of violations are we talking about? What are the claims the EIP is making?
They run the gamut. It really breaks down to two main things and kind of in concert with each other. So if you find a record keeping violation, that was by far the most common one, like 80 odd percent or
Right. It
more
seems
had to
like
do with
the
that.
paperwork is
Paperwork,
not that tight, right?
right, but it also uh, would happen in concert with some sort of waste disposal, like actual, tangible violation like that. So, like I said, things like finding too much manure on uh, the the pavement in front of a chicken house, or like I said, improperly stored manure or dead birds or something like that. And that was something like 60% of all the cases had that. So you usually had those two things kind of working hand in hand, uh, as far as this, as I said, this trove of document goes.
Right. Okay. What type of effects can, waterways, but groundwater as well, perhaps? What type of like environmental effects can happen as a result of
Mhm.
contamination of the phosphorus or any of the pathogens that are contained in chicken manure?
Yeah. So I think the report really tries really hard, particularly the companion report that kind of deals more with the waterway situation. They try really hard to kind of make this connection between these violations and the water quality problems that we have here on the Eastern Shore. And I think it's true to a large extent. I'm not sure if it's as true as they would like that argument to be. Just because it's difficult to prove. Okay, we
Yeah, of
have
course, of course.
we have yeah, right, phosphorus and nutrients in this water. Now, where did it come from? And okay, we do have there's certainly a correlation. Um, we have a lot of chicken farms, so absolutely, I think everyone agrees that that's plays a huge role in it. But to say that this violation or this particular trend in violations is therefore causing some decrease in tributary water quality, that's a lot more difficult to uh, to pack into a scientifically speaking. I think narrative wise, yeah, I mean it sounds right, but like from a scientific perspective, it's a lot harder thing to
Yeah,
go
I
out there
understand
and
it. It's hard to
say.
directly
Yeah.
measure that type of thing, and to pick apart all the independent factors that contribute to
I
pollution.
I think what the larger thing here that this says, and why I think it was a story nonetheless, is um, because we do agree. The science does agree that the proliferation of chicken farms here is making it that much more of a challenge to clean up these waterways. If we're uh, the number of farms is not increasing, but the total weight of chickens that are produced here are growing because they're uh, the chickens themselves are engineered to be bigger. And so you're really fighting headwinds if you're trying to then, decrease nitrogen and in particular phosphorus from local waterways, because that manure's got to go somewhere. And
Hmm.
so it isn't so much what happens inside the chicken houses, right? That's under a roof and there's walls and everything. It's what happens when those chicken houses inevitably have to be cleaned out. And then what do you do with the manure? Well, Circle of Life put it on the land so that you can grow more corn and soybeans, so that you can grow more chickens. But how much is too much? And that's what we've seen here is too much phosphorus in particular, and therefore the soil can't absorb it and it washes away in heavy rains into ditches and streams and eventually the bay. So that's what I think the larger story is here. Yeah, this is part and parcel of what we've seen, that we're trying to get a handle on this industry from, from a modeling standpoint, from a regulatory standpoint, and then here's the enforcement part. And while it may be difficult to draw that line directly to water pollution, there's certainly something. There is a there, as we like to say.
Right. Well, it certainly should be impetus to warrant like a further investigation by actual scientists, perhaps, or people who do this. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and like I
because
said,
we know it is happening. Oh, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So right. We just you just mentioned the agricultural use of chicken manure. Could you talk about that for a minute?
Right. So chicken manure is obviously a byproduct of raising chickens. Okay, they call it chicken litter. It's kind of a combination of the little, wood shavings and other material, and but mainly, the chicken droppings are in there. And so you got to do something with that over time. You can have flocks over a certain amount of time, even years, but eventually you've got to, muck out your chicken farm. So historically, what has happened is the farmers would just, hey, this is great. I got free fertilizer right here. So they would spread it on their own farms. Usually, chicken farms have adjoining corn and soybean operations. And so, boom, there you go. Put the manure right on the farm. It does a fantastic job at, as a fertilizer. You really don't even need to add much of anything from the commercial side. So what happened over a number of years of that practice was, you kind of think of the farmland, the soil as a sponge. You fill up a sponge with water, it does a great job for a while, but then eventually it can't hold any more water. So you think of that sponge as soil now, and that water as phosphorus.
Hmm.
That sponge can no longer hold the phosphorus, so it just leaches into the groundwater, or it flushes off in the nearest rain. If it happens to have been recently applied, goes into the ditches and streams. Either way, it's heading toward the bay. And so that's what we have. We have farms here, some of which on the shore, where you could go 4 decades, 40 years without applying any more phosphorus, and they would raise 40 years worth of corn and soybeans. You wouldn't have to add any to it. I mean, that's not to say you wouldn't have to add other fertilizer type components, but many places you can add it and many places you can't. So that's why we have this cost sharing program with where you and I as taxpayers help subsidize the cost of transporting this manure to places on the shore, and even as far as Pennsylvania and Virginia, to take it where they need it. A popular place is the mushroom farms in Pennsylvania. They basically just grow in the dark and manure, and
Okay.
so that's where a lot of our manure goes. So next time you eat a mushroom, thank a Delmarva chicken for that.
So yeah, it seems that okay, so what you're saying about it is that the chicken manure is kind of like a fertilizer superfood for
Mhm.
soybeans and crops.
Yeah, yeah,
For
that's
the
fair.
farmers,
Maybe.
it is. So it appears that the use of the chicken manure fertilizer is not as like endemic as the non-compliance of the poultry farms. However, there's no regulation around this at all, even for the abuses that are happening. Is that accurate?
I'm trying to unpack that. I would say it's pretty heavily regulated, actually. The farmers have.
Well, it said in your
You,
article that at the bottom that no farmers have been fined for.
oh, okay, I see what you mean.
Yeah, it says no farmers have been fined for failing to follow manure limits. The EIP said.
Right. Yeah. So, yeah, absolutely. So farmers are required to submit these annual nutrient management plans. And so this is kind of where it gets a little tricky, because there's context here, which is that in the last 3 years, Maryland has been transitioning to a new uh, regulatory regimen, which is phosphorus management tool, if you've heard of that. And what was new here is it basically sets a limit as to how much you can apply on your land, and actually requires the farmers to test their soil
Hmm.
to say, okay, you can apply this much phosphorus and you must record it and send it to us. Well, this is all, of course, self-monitoring, which is always works out well, let's say, in
Okay.
the polluting environment. But beyond that, I think what's happening is, like, there's been this grace period, so that farmers can get used to this, and a number of them are, it just went officially full implemented this past summer, like July. So this time period that we're talking about really overlays a lot of that. So I think if there haven't been fines and penalties, I think it's because that's where we're at right now. Is they're trying to get their feet on the ground with this new tool. And like I said before, this compliance assistance. If they have it on the MDE side, they're especially doing it on the MDA, the agricultural department side.
Right, right. But getting back to
Mhm.
the shared issue between the poultry farmers and the farmers is that
Yeah.
there's a real lack of regulation going on. Can you
I think enforcement, the regulations. I mean, ours are some of the
enforcement?
most
Yes, yes.
progressive in the country. I mean, maybe outside of California, they're really progressive. Again, by comparison, that doesn't mean like they couldn't go further, and that people would like them. Many people would like them to go further, but I'm just saying, Maryland is much further along than Virginia and Pennsylvania
Mm.
when it comes to this sort of thing. So I think it's important to note that, right, that we're not, bad actors in a bad system or anything like that. It's a more complicated system than other places, and yeah, but the enforcement side, you could say, according to this report, um, is not, uh, say, bringing the hammer as much as some in the environmental community would like.
So, yeah, could you talk us about regulators or lack thereof
Mhm.
in the
Yeah,
in
so
the
they have
region?
three inspectors for this entire program of 500 odd poultry operations here on the Maryland side alone. And one of them is a supervisor. So they're kind of have other tasks on their plate as well. So really two full-time people are devoted to this. So I think this is where EIP would like to see some legislation or administrative action, uh, to say, look, we need to beef up our regulatory efforts here, because obviously if you don't have inspectors uh, policing them, then you won't find the. It was like the early part of COVID, right? If you don't test for it, it isn't there. If you don't test for, um, you know, uh, improperly stored chicken manure, then you're not going to find it. And so no, I don't think anyone wants to see that happen. So
So, how long has this been the case with just have well, so there's three inspectors and one of them is like a full-time
right,
desk employee, like a supervisor type
right.
guy, right? So, I know there's been recent budget cuts as of last year. Hogan cut a bunch of state workers out, and I wanted to know if any of these people were laid off as a result of that.
I'm unsure of that. According to this report, the latest and greatest total is that three number, but it hasn't changed, at least until that period. It hadn't changed for a number of years. Like it's not like they had 10 5 years ago or anything. It's
Yeah, yeah. Do you
pretty
have any
low
like
for a long
historical
time.
context about um
I do not. I'm sorry.
okay. It's theorized that high phosphorus content in the water contributes to dead zones. What's your opinion of that?
Right. Yeah. So I don't need to have an opinion here. That's what the Bay program is kind of all about, right? I appreciate the question because it's important to kind of describe. I keep saying, "Oh, that's bad for the Bay," but the why is that it's this overabundance of nitrogen, phosphorus, that are washing off, and not just agriculture. I mean, that's obviously an enormous source of it, but people's lawns and from wastewater treatment plants, all contributing to this overfeeding of the bay. And our bay is very shallow, it's very short, very narrow, and so it doesn't have a lot of dilution power. It's
Yeah.
one thing for the Mississippi River, but that also has a dead zone, but it's also flowing into the Gulf of Mexico, which is huge by comparison, many times larger. So about 1,000 times more diluting capacity than the Chesapeake Bay does. So these nutrients, they pack a big punch when they go under the bay. And I mean, if it's fertilizer for your lawn and fertilizer for, corn, that's what it is for the plant life in the middle of the bay. And that plant life is the kind we don't like, unfortunately. It's we called harmful algae blooms. So the phytoplankton eat it up. They bloom in the summertime when they're active, and then towards the end of the summer they die off. And as they die off, there's this chemical reaction that happens that basically robs or steals the water of oxygen, and particularly at lower depths because there isn't a lot of mixing with the surface where there's oxygen up there. So the lower depths in the main stem of the bay and in some of the tributaries can become what's called anoxic.
Mm.
So we call it a dead zone, which makes it sound like there's zero oxygen or something, but it's really just this low oxygen area. And basically anything that can't move out of the way, any fish or benthic organism like crabs or oysters, they die in that scenario. And so really that's been used as the centerpiece of the bay restoration since the beginning in 1983. I mean, there's a lot of things you could try to clean up for, right? You could clean up for to help rockfish, or clean up to help for, underwater grass meadows or oysters or whatever. But this is really kind of the main, and they do, by the way, but this is really the main thrust of the entire effort from the beginning, is trying to get rid of or at least shrink that dead zone, so that we have a bay that's full of life, the way we like it. So we can have oysters and crabs to eat, and beautiful, beautiful clear water to look at. And
Yeah, yeah.
having too many farms, too much phosphorus, and all those other things, obviously works against that.
Well, right. On that note, I was looking at the Bay Journal main page today, and two of the other articles is one is the dead zone is bigger this year than it was
Yeah.
last year in 2020.
Well, the dead zone, it's about average. Well, it's average, but it's lasting longer, and it's lasting longer because the conditions, it's staying warmer longer thanks to climate change, and therefore, so it may not have been larger than average this year, but it was. If it's sticking around longer, that's not good either. So yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Right, yeah. And the other one was on the Western Shore, some food poisoning from oysters related
Yeah,
to a sewage spill that wasn't
right.
reported or communicated about. Did you read that one too?
Yeah, that was awful. MDE didn't, for whatever reason, and I think you'll be reading more about this, but there was sewage spill, and partially treated sewage, diluted but not cleaned up, and it got into this tributary over there in Maryland, and MDE didn't report it, didn't catch it right away, and by then these oysters had been harvested by an oyster farm and had been consumed, and people got sick. So uh, people ask me, why don't you like why don't you eat raw oysters? And I'm like, God bless you if you do, man. But I don't know. I'm not there for that.
Oh no, I'm with you too, and I've always been that outlier in my friend group. I'm like, this is like kind of like literally a filter. Like, think about it. Like
Yeah.
what if you washed your dishes and then ate the sponge afterwards? You know?
Yeah. I think oysters are, I know I'm being, I'm probably being just too, tough on it. But 99.999% of the time, I'm sure you're fine. But it's just, these cases like this pop up, and you have a news report and you go, you see. So yeah, covering the restoration and covering the health of the bay. I mean, there's no one that does what we at the Bay Journal do. So when you look at our web page, it's kind of a one-stop shop for. You don't have to see anything there mixed in about crime or local politics. We're pretty heavily focused on just that one thing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the common problem with that issue is that it was like a lack of communication, or the
Yeah.
MDE didn't communicate to the fish farm or whoever the authorities were that the sewage
hmm
leak has occurred.
It,
And
it took too long in any case. Yeah.
yeah, so kind of seems like a similar issue where there's like a lack of personnel or lack of enforcement, lack of communication about what's going on to, keep people from getting sick is the
Mhm.
common.
Yeah, and again, I think this is we could say here of MDE, but I've you see stories too, I'm sure, about how the USDA doesn't have enough inspectors, on the
Hmm.
production lines, and TSA, and everybody, every company, public and private, everyone's trying to skimp by because hey, we can do more with less, right? And yeah, that's true until it doesn't.
Yeah, yeah. Until new problems come up and you haven't invested anything to
or
pull
old
yourself out.
problems like sewage spills
Yeah,
contaminating your oyster farm.
yeah, yeah. And then people get sick. People get
Yes.
sick who are innocent people just wanting to enjoy oysters. You know, I'm sorry to anybody who likes oysters who I've offended.
No, they should eat oysters a lot. Those shells, those spent shells, are usually just make sure they get recycled and used to help be put back on the bottom of the bay so they can seed new oyster reef. So you eat an oyster, you're probably, if you eat it on the half shell, you're probably doing something good for the bay. So don't listen to me. Go ahead, eat your oysters.
Yeah, don't listen to me. You can enjoy your oysters. It's totally fine. I won't
Right.
judge you.
Right.
All right. I think that about wraps it, Jeremy. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about I didn't ask about?
No, I live on the shore myself, so I've lived here for a decade, and so uh, I'm not someone from the Western Shore. I mean, I think some of my colleagues do a great job of covering, but I actually live, breathe, and eat this stuff. So that's what we try to do at the Bay Journals. We have people living all over, and so you get kind of local coverage, even though it's a regional scale publication. And so if you're folks, if I can do a little plug here to subscribe, it's for free if you can believe it. What's free anymore? You go to bayjournal.com, you can read that all the time with uh, no annoying banner ads, no nothing asking you to subscribe there. But if you do want to get the print edition, right in the right upper right hand corner, there's a subscribe button. You put in your address, your mailing address. It'll show up in your mailbox once a month, and again, you pay zero, so not a bad deal.
That's paying zero is a great deal, but donating is even better, especially when
Hey,
quality reporting like this comes out of it, which you can read and digest for free. Okay.
that is true. That is true. I always forget to say to donate, but if you do find it in your heart, you can do that as well. And there's directions on bayjournal.com as well for that. I thank all of our readers because we've been around for 30 years and it's not possible without you guys.
Absolutely. That sounds beautiful. All right, Jeremy. Okay, do you want to plug your socials or anything?
Yeah, I guess you could find me if you want at Jeremy underscore Cox, COX on the Twitter. And like I said, the podcast is Chesapeake Uncharted, and that's Chess Uncharted, CHES Uncharted on the Twitter. You can find them on Facebook too. Just search them there. And yeah, let's keep the conversation going. It's good talking to you, Brian.
All right. Good talking to you, Jeremy. Thanks, bud.
All right, take care.